Hello and welcome to the Horse Race Politics podcast. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Louis Bromfield, postdoctoral researcher in politics at Swansea University. And joining me, as always, is a man who treats every wrong prediction as a learning opportunity, which means, statistically, he's the smartest person I've ever met. The living embodiment of regression meeting depression. It's Professor Matthew Wall. How are you?
Shemai, Louis, how are you?
I'm not bad. I'm not mad. And I think we probably do need to be throwing a bit more Welsh into the pod.
Borada, everyone.
It's the afternoon, so it's print hound actually.
Is it the afternoon already?
It
Yeah,
is.
that's surprising. I'm behind in my day in that case.
Well, and today we have the pleasure of being joined by the one and only Professor Rob Ford, who is over my shoulder here. On your university entry page, Rob, you say, and I quote, "I have various research interests within the broad areas of public opinion, electoral choice, and party politics." To kick us off today, are you able to explain to the audience a little bit what this means? And also, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm very impressed by your studio, by the way.
It is. It's all
I
bankrolled
feel,
by Matt Wall. The wife and kids aren't happy, but at least we've got a nice sofa, you know?
I feel like I'm coming onto like This Morning or The One Show.
Yeah, this was meant to be the
It's
kids' playroom, but like, yeah.
fantastic. But very, very well, very relaxed. And in terms of what that means on my website, well, the first thing it means is that I haven't bothered to update my university profile in about 10 years and chose to be very strategically vague when I wrote it in the
Nice.
first place. But these days, what it means is kind of obsessing over British elections and British public opinion. Just finished a book on the 2024 general election, which will be out
Nice.
next month in all good bookstores, very reasonably priced, etc., etc.
What's the title?
The British general election of 2024.
Oh wow, some
Yeah.
sophisticated wordplay
Very
there.
imaginatively titled. The main worry I have about it is it's got a big picture of Keir Starmer looking happy in front of Downing Street on the cover, and I'm hoping we can get it out before that picture is no longer
You didn't
rendition.
go with Rishi in the Rain. I feel like that's
We went with Rishi in the Rain on the back.
fair.
So we've got like Starmer waving from Downing Street on the front, and then
Rishi
on the back you've got like a soggy, bedraggled, hunched over Sunak going into the same Downing Street door. So I thought it was quite a nice sort of pairing of images.
That was to launch the campaign, right? As I recall.
That was.
My goodness.
It was to launch the campaign, and it was an amazing moment, not just because the heavens opened more or less as soon as he started and no one thought to bring a brolly out, but also because as he was trying to deliver his case for the election, you could hear the dulcet tones of Dee Ream wafting onto the microphone because Steve Bray had rocked up to Downing Street and started playing Things Can Only Get Better, and it took them half of his speech to get rid of him. It was a sort of genuine.
But things, I mean, ironically,
moment.
things actually got worse across the campaign, right? So you had like the D-Day defenestration.
Yes.
I mean, you had the it sounds like, it literally feels like something that you're like remembering from a drug trip. Like Rishi Sunak proposed to recruit all like 18-year-olds into the British Army.
Yeah.
Just randomly during the campaign.
Yeah.
An idea.
So there was a brain trust of a room of people who thought this is the way to go. This is going to win us this election.
That was the one with the key like innovation, like policy kind of what would you call it? Flourishes of the campaign. Yeah, so
it was a big splash.
Yeah.
Too many splashes.
The only thing that my kids, who are now 16 and 12, noticed about the whole campaign, and I was having great fun with it because I was saying, well, you better tidy your rooms, or I'm going to tell Rishi Sunak to send you to the front. So.
It's like Jordan Peterson, but with consequences. This is horrible. I will get into what we are effectively going to plan. This will be another two-parter. So there are some caveats that we do need to make because I believe in our first part, I think Matt is going to kind of lead us because we're going to focus our discussion on the by-election that will be taking place in Kafili. But we have to disclose that we are recording this episode on the 9th of October, not the day that it's going out, which is the 16th of October. So if anything happens between now and then, you can't blame us. You can only blame the linearity of the passage of time, which I think is pretty fair. In our second part, which will come out the following week, We are going to be talking kind of more broadly about how Labour's administration has gone so far, their kind of decline, reform surge, the more or less the death of the Conservative Party. And yes,
I understand.
Any comments,
Kemi Badenoch made a decent speech. That was.
if you're only going to make one speech, you might as well make it
I
a
mean,
good
she
one.
made 2 speeches, but the second one was meant to be decent, as I heard. But that's the first good news I've heard about the Conservatives in a long time.
But I think
Although
we'll.
it did feel a little bit like, I remember Phil Cowley saying ahead of Ed Miliband's first leaders speech back in, when would that have been, like 2010 or 2011? He said the negative press about Miliband meant that expectations were so low that all he had to do was walk out on stage and not publicly crap himself, and people would declare it to be a good speech. And it did feel a little bit like that. You know, she'd said so many insane and completely wrong things in the weeks running up, that the fact that she could deliver a coherent or modestly coherent argument for 40 minutes or so seemed to really impress everybody, rather than being the kind of thing that you might expect a third-year undergraduate to be capable of.
Yeah, I mean, our undergraduates are very capable. You
Yeah,
know, I don't know.
yes.
Swansea anyway. Like,
in all fairness, like walking out and not publicly crapping yourself is the expectation I hold Matt to on a daily basis, and he
Well.
routinely fails to to meet that very low bar.
Yeah.
So, just for context, so we're going to focus firstly on Kafili.
Mhm.
So, I mean, Matt, you can provide a bit more details, but for those who are kind of unaware, this is a massive by-election in terms of getting kind of a temperature check on national politics, but it follows the unfortunate passing of Heaven David,
Mhm.
member of the Senedd for Caerphilly, and it is taking place in 2 weeks.
Mhm.
So
as we record,
as we record. So Matt, can you provide a little bit of context and kind of kick off the chat?
and really, I'm keen to hear Rob's like the extent to which some of my reasoning and thinking about Welsh politics aligns with what you can see from sort of outside Wales, as it were. So the first thing I'd say is, I think I've been struck in my conversations with people who are sort of in the Welsh Senedd, you know, people who are sort of involved in politics, how many of them feel that there's a sort of a much wider attention and interest in this Senedd election that will take place next year than has like heretofore been the case for previous Senedd elections. And I think that's mostly to do with the fact that it's wrapped up in the growth of reform.
Yeah.
And every election in the UK at the moment is a kind of litmus test for, like, can these polling numbers, reforms come through into voting numbers. So that's something I've just is that your impression from the outside, Rob, that people are taking a bit of more of an interest in Welsh electoral politics than was heretofore the case, or am I just getting inflated in my ego because I'm studying it so closely?
Have you got like word of the day toilet paper that says heretofore on it? I think there are about 6 of those in that question.
Heretofore. No. Well, do you think Wales is popping off basically as a kind of in the kind of electoral studies world more so?
I mean, amongst academics, yes, because we're aware of the stakes and everything. I mean, in terms of the Westminster Village, I think it is true that there's probably already more attention being paid to the coming Senedd election than was probably true in most recent electoral cycles. Although that is, I'm afraid to say, quite a low bar to clear in terms of Westminster interest in Senedd elections. But and it is being driven by the reform story. So, I mean, one of the things I found interesting reading up on this by-election is, you know, this seems to be a seat that's, you know, Labour since forever, quite a strong Plaid vote. None of the coverage I've seen of it discussing it from a Westminster perspective is talking about Labour or Plaid. They're all talking about whether or not reform can win it, because it's again being treated as a proxy for how serious should we take the prospect of a Farage government. I actually had a question, man. I mean, like, this is a bit odd, isn't it? Because they're moving to a new electoral system next year.
This is very, very, very likely the last by-election we'll ever have in the Senedd. They'll move because they'll be moving to a list-based system.
Yeah.
where you know, the circumstances that would create a vacancy will just result in the next person on the list being brought in.
Yeah.
So just for the general audience, that just means like outside of an election, you're not going to see something like this where just a random election for one seat pops up again.
The single seat tier of the electoral system is being removed altogether.
Yeah.
And so the single seat tier is what creates by elections kind of structurally. In the sort of party list system that we'll see, such by elections won't take place. There will be there's draft legislation about recall and replacement sanctions that might enable a constituency-wide referendum, which would be quite something, on the recommendation of the kind of disciplinary committee. So just to answer your question, yeah, the people who are sort of working in, if you like, the kind of democratic governance space here are all trying to retool for a new electoral system. So this by-election is, yeah, it's a kind of the last hurrah for the old electoral system.
Because it did make me wonder a little bit about whether that might have at least a modest impact on the psychology of voters participating in it. Because by-elections are often treated as, an opportunity to give the government of the day a
Kick.
bloody nose, a kind of expressive politics free hit. That's why we often see quite big swings in all forms of by-elections. But this is kind of a double free hit in that whoever gets returned is only going to be there for what are we talking, 7 months?
Yeah.
And then you'll be getting to elect a whole bunch of new members under a completely different system. And obviously we all know, sad to say, that voter awareness of these kinds of things isn't massive, but I would think that amongst voters who participate in a by-election, many of them will know that, and maybe it'll impact how they behave a little bit.
Yeah, it's difficult to say. I think I've been struck with the kind of some of the messaging in the campaign. Generally, I'm like, this is the last time we'll see this kind of messaging. Like, so Labour had a truck going around Caerphilly being like, only Labour can win. You know, the kind of classic
the Lib Dem kind of
Duverger's law.
only Lib Dems can win here. Yeah.
Pick. You know, a vote for Plaid is a vote for reform. So obviously, once we move to these 6-seat constituencies, those kind of arguments don't play in the same way. You know, you need something like 10 to 12% of the vote to kind of get over the line in those cases. In terms of voters' sort of tactical thinking, yeah, it's difficult to say. There's not a lot of like information coming out of Caerphilly. Like, you know, often with by-elections, it's a lot of vibes that you're looking at as an analyst. What has been really striking to me, so I shared with you guys the betting market odds, is to the extent I've seen polling information, like Plaid are slightly in the lead in the constituency, or it's kind of a 2-horse race. But in the betting, Reform are like strong favourites. So, you know, something like a 65% to 35% favourite sort of status. And to give some context, like that's similar to what Joe Biden was ahead of Donald Trump in 2020 in the kind of closing weeks of the campaign.
But just to like emphasize how different things were back in 2021 when Heaven won the election.
Yeah,
I just got
that's a good point.
pulled the numbers. He won with a majority of 5,000 votes, which was close to an 18-point percentage lead over Dereth Jewell, who was the candidate for Plaid. The Reform candidate was Tim Price, who got 495 votes, which was roughly, I believe, 1/27th of Heaven's vote count. So, you know, I don't want to oversimplify, but like that is a fundamentally transformative shift in the course of, and it's fundamentally transformative when contextualized in the national polling that we've kind of talked about briefly. Of you now effectively have a 2-horse race between these two, with Labour polling around the low teens.
And I think the nationwide polling we've had in Wales is kind of crystallized around those kind of data points. Labour in the kind of mid-teens is very difficult to kind of conceptualize as someone who lives in Wales and has been through a few electoral cycles here. Their support has kind of leaked in a variety of directions, but primarily to Plaid Cymru. So one of the patterns we've seen, so Jack Larner at Cardiff is very good on polling patterns, is this kind of Plaid to Labour shift has firmed up over the last few months. It seems to have kind of hardened. There's also a Labour to Reform, like so in Caerphilly, like the kind of it couldn't be a close election without Labour people going and voting Reform. Um, and but what I'm kind of interested in is where is this? What is the source of this discrepancy? Like, and it's always a question of betting odds. Is it just that like people who bet like Reform, or is there some kind of hidden information out there that Reform are more favourable than I see them? But it does seem like every poll they're stronger than you thought they'd be. Um, and you know, even at the national level, like maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I would have said a Plaid Cymru Labour government would have a nice easy majority. Probably Plaid are going to lead that government. So it seemed to me quite a predictable election coming up in that sense. And now, like that block is right on the edge of a majority. So voters are changing, like right, like from the left to the kind of right of the spectrum, and they seem to be kind of firming up there.
Can I put a question to both of you? It's the kind of, it might be a bit of a cliched question to ask, but over the last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of tensions around Andy Burnham as the the man who would be king, potential replacement of Starmer. I know, Rob, you made a very good point about the fact that it doesn't matter, win this by-election, you've got to face the Senedd elections again very, very soon. But how much pressure does this translate into for Keir Starmer if A, Labour don't win, or B, Reform do win?
Well, just to talk for the by-election, it's nearly like it would be a huge upset if Labour won. That's where we are now. And just to say about Keir Starmer, like his favourability ratings are like testing the range of that statistic. just to put some like that's the case in the Welsh polling.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Rob. Do you have any?
Yeah, I mean it's no different in the Westminster polling. I mean, I went through the whole Mori data series recently because I was very surprised. I was at Labour conference for some things, and I was very surprised that like the mood was surprisingly chipper and upbeat.
Yeah.
So I was like, is there any polling justification for them being chipper and upbeat?
Do you think that's more denial rather than
that I can see
anything else?
So I looked at the Mori approval ratings for leaders at this point in a parliament, and Starmer's are the worst of all. Worse than Sunak. I mean, Truss
could have got there, right?
She didn't come close to lasting that long. But amongst those who actually made it to sort of 14 months in, he's the worst by some margin actually, and the biggest declines too, and the worst ever polling average for a governing party. So it's all grim. And in a weird sort of way, I think that means that Labour losing Kafili to Reform maybe won't make much of an impact, at least in terms of the Westminster conversation, because it's sort of priced in. It's a sort of dog bites man story. I think Labour losing to Plaid might make more of an impact because there is this big internal arm wrestle going on in Labour now between those who say we have to focus on reform, and when they say we have to focus on reform, they often seem to mean we need to win back votes from reform directly. And in multi-party politics, those two things don't necessarily link up. You can need to focus on reform without actually, winning votes from reform directly being the best way to do that, because you could try and consolidate anti-reform voters elsewhere. But a loss to Plaid would be a piece of evidence for the other side of the argument, which is the people who are saying the focus on reform is a mistake because for every vote Labour are losing to reform, they're losing 2 to the Lib Dems and the Greens directly in England, probably, and probably even more in Wales with Plaid added on as well. And if we want to survive, we have to actually move in the opposite direction to reform in order to get those voters back. So I think a Plaid win also because it would be unexpected, because I think one of the things the betting markets does tell us about is the vibes, is the conventional wisdom. And I suspect it is partly because reform is so dominating the conversation in London and Westminster that's what the betting market price is saying. Because one of my theories about the betting markets is who's got the money to do this and the time to do this. And I think that those markets have a very kind of here's the view from London type
Like a
bias
skew,
for
yeah,
that reason, because that's the kind of people who are doing it. And so I think it will therefore land as a surprise, and surprises tend to have a bigger impact on the conversation.
Yeah, and I think just on the betting market stuff, I, I've also been of that disposition, right? Thinking about the kind of bros who are on the betting markets and the kind of politics that they actually like, and the kind of cognitive dissonance mechanisms that make people just bet on stuff they want to happen. But then the markets were like right in the Trump case, and especially in the counting, that really fascinated me. That there was a phase in the vote count when the market started to shift, where I couldn't see online or on TV what was happening, and but they'd said something had happened. Does that make sense? Like, all that count data is very complicated, but I was kind of brought to respect the betting markets more over the course of the Trump, especially in terms of like the overall majority market, for example. You know, that was giving Trump a good solid chance of getting an overall outright majority, when I think all the polling and the discussion was very much discounting that. So it's but it's always difficult to know the mechanisms, and as you say, it's not a one person one vote system in terms of setting the betting prices. It depends how much you put up.
Is there
I think
any?
it depends a bit on the
Sorry.
market as well, Matt. The presidential election market is millions of
Yeah,
pounds
billions. Yeah, it's huge.
being exchanged, whereas the Caerphilly by-election market isn't quite in. It's not as deep. So
Yeah, no, the volume of the market is key, yeah, in terms of its reliability. But we will see. But I do think I do think I'd like to talk about this as a test bed for reform, kind of campaigning, and in particular, I suppose the challenges that a party like Reform might face, right? So they've come up very quickly in polling. Um, how would I say it? I see the election as about them being like mobilizing a lot of people who don't normally vote. If they do that, I think it's theirs. Would you see it similarly in terms of like their wider, like the profile of their voter? Is that a profile that generally is less likely to vote previously? Does that make sense?
yeah, I think that there is a lot to that. I mean, one of the under-discussed elements with last year's general election was the steep decline in turnout to the second lowest ever. And actually, Phil Cowley prompted me to do this bit of analysis. If you take account of the big expansion in postal voting, which was made a lot easier last year, and people just do return their postal votes more often. In terms of in-person voting propensity, probably the lowest turnout universal franchise election ever. So if we hadn't made postal voting so much easier, the turnout would have gone below 2001 when there was very little postal voting.
Wow.
So clearly, engagement was very low. So that's point number one. You're starting from there's a lot of voters out there who express their unhappiness with the current political status quo already with staying at home. Point number two, we know from the radical right across many European countries, they very often, a big slice of the electorate they mobilise is people who hadn't previously voted. You see it with AFD, you see it with Sweden Democrats, so on, so on. Even in higher turnout contexts, this is often a slice that they get because they reach them in a way that the other parties don't. And then I think point number three is that we are already seeing it. It was evident, for example, in the by-election in May, the turnout for that was unusually high for a by-election of that kind. And Labour, I think, were fairly confident that they had turned out their vote and were then really taken by surprise by the fact that it was very, very tight and then they lost it. And it seemed to be because Reform were turning out people who just didn't normally vote. And I think we've seen it in council by-elections too. We've seen it in the wave of council elections in May. So I think part of what is going on with Reform and their unusual strength in the polls, and the reason that they're above where I would have put their ceiling, I would have put their ceiling in the low to mid 20s, is that they are mobilizing non-voters, and non-voters have long been the kind of dark matter of British politics, because it's everywhere, but no one knows anything about it, but it has the potential to exercise great influence.
Mm.
And I think a Welsh election, they're often sort of traditionally somewhat lower turnout than
That's right.
Westminster as well. That's going to amplify the potential for that kind of thing. So I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, I
And of
mean, if you,
course, it then becomes a key organisational test of reform is, well, can
yeah,
they actually get
Yeah.
those people out?
yeah, exactly. If you think about it as a kind of an opportunity space where, like, we've never had a Senedd election with more than 50% turnout.
Mm.
So, obviously, you need 51% to actually win the election. So that's quite a big portion of people. And I think that what I haven't seen evidence of, but I'm not au fait really in reform circles, to be fair, is evidence of this kind of, like American style, get out the vote, big push. Um, and I think a lot of the people who haven't voted before will benefit from the support that they need. But at the end of the day, it's going around with a laptop and getting people to
Mm.
register to vote. Help knocking them up on the election day. This kind of what would you call it? Ground war politics, we call it in campaign analysis. I think that I don't know that infrastructure is kind of going to come together in time for the by-election. I think that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, that feeds into something that I wanted to put to you, Rob. Is a lot of the conversation is on, and we're admittedly contributing to this, is of imagining this reality where reform wins, it, without getting into like explicit number crunching or stating. Is there like a kind of like a minimum that you think reform would be happy with in an election like this? I mean, same for Plaid as well, as they stand a chance.
So I mean the Senedd election, the full,
I'm
like next year's election.
Caerphilly
Oh,
itself,
okay.
or the Senedd election, more generally, in terms of, even if reform come second or third, there's no doubt an argument to be made of like, oh well, we've captured a 2,000% vote increase on our last election.
We've run a candidate who was a long-standing associate of a colleague who pled guilty to corruption charges.
Yeah, and we came third. That's
That
really
might have
good.
depressed our vote somewhat.
But so the question is, I guess, where do you see kind of the minimum expectation for reform at this point, or do you think they're kind of operating on a vibes basis, and anything better than what Death Duel got in 2011 with 500 votes represents a success?
Well, I think these kinds of elections, there's always an expectations management
Mm-hmm.
game. You see this very, very often with local election cycles where, the people like Lord Hayward for the Conservative Party can put out a number of seats losses, and you can say, okay, so they expect to lose about 200 seats less than that, because
Mm-hmm.
that's why he's putting that number out.
Yeah.
Reform don't really do that very much, to be honest.
Yeah.
They perhaps because they've not been around on the scene long enough, perhaps because
Mm.
actually all hype all the time is actually a good strategy for them at the
Yeah.
moment, in terms of reinforcing their upward trajectory. But as a consequence of that, I think anything less than a first place finish in both of the elections you talk about will be a setback for them, because it will be perceived as a setback for them.
Yeah.
People will expect them to win because they've been on a roll of winning. They haven't, as far as I can see, made any effort to downplay that expectation. And so the conversation will become, which is incidentally a conversation I think a lot of people in Westminster are primed to have, because they get bored of writing the same article over and over.
Mm.
So all these, reforms, relentless rise, is Farage going to number 10? So they really, really want to write the has reform peaked, has the bubble
Yeah.
burst article. They're
Yeah.
primed for that. So I think it's in a way a bit of a double-edged sword for reform, because the fact they're being treated as the coming force in British politics is tremendously good for them. May well indeed
Mm.
help with mobilising the sort of lower engagement voters they want to appeal to, but it means that even what is, by the standards of even a few years ago, a truly remarkable performance will end
Yeah.
up being treated as a setback.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and I think there's always that kind of sense of the narrative of our collective politics being kind of Westminster focused, right? But there's also the like political reality that here in Wales, we could end up with what I thought I'd never say is like a reform minority government isn't totally implausible if you look at some of the polling numbers, right? Especially if Plaid suffer some kind of collapse or catastrophe.
Yeah.
So like, I guess a question that occurs to me a lot is, so people kind of talk about this. Oh well, once you come up against the hard realities of a campaign and you're asked to enunciate like policy positions, and like the reform people don't have a Welsh leader, a spokesperson to do that. You know, they'll throw out, well, maybe we'll just abolish the Senedd. You know, so depending on who you're talking to, they have a different policy. But does that matter for their voters? Like, it does that sort of exposure
Nice question.
hurt them?
I think it's short run, not very much. Cumulatively and longer run, it may well do, particularly once they're actually governing things that people are paying attention to. So I, I, I do think scrutiny for reform is basically 90% downside. There's the 10%
What's the
upside is
10%?
that people. Well, the only upside is that people are still talking about
Talking
them.
about
That's
them,
always
yeah.
good. It's
Any
the Oscar
publicity
Wilde
is good
principle,
publicity,
isn't
yeah.
it? Always better to be talked about.
Yeah.
And like you say, a lot of their voters ex ante are not so fussed about like whether or not any of this stuff stacks up, because a lot of this is anti-politics, anti-system, anti the traditional parties, or indeed, which isn't a completely unreasonable impulse, everyone else has failed. What's the issue with rolling the dice?
Yeah.
Why not?
It
It's not
is
like anyone
no,
else is doing
it
better.
is an unreasonable impulse. It's a stupid thing to
Well,
do. Like, I mean, everyone else has failed. Let's just put the crazy people in charge. Isn't a reasonable impulse, in my opinion. Like, I understand the impulse of the anti-establishment thinking, but there are lots of people who could be in charge of the country who aren't in the establishment.
But the
I think,
people who are
but
in
it
that orbit,
requires them
yeah.
to see these as the crazy people, and
Yeah,
that's why I say
yeah.
short term, not a lot of harm. Longer term, a lot of harm.
Mm,
I mean, because if we take, for example, Trump's ratings in his second term, I mean, one of Trump's earliest campaign lines, which has stuck with me because of everything that happened since, is when he was going to groups like African American voters and saying, "Well, why not vote for me? How much worse could it be?"
Yeah.
So he was saying like the risk is low because the status quo is shit
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
can't get worse. Now, the problem with that statement isn't the first two bits, it's the final bit.
yeah.
It can get worse. We all know in this podcast that yes, it can get a lot worse.
It
A lot of
can.
voters don't really see the downside, but when the downside arrives, then that's where I think scrutiny and credibility becomes a major issue for reform. I mean, if they were in charge of a Westminster government and there was a huge bond market crash, for
Yes.
example, in a recession, I think a lot of people would get very pissed off with them very quickly.
Yes,
I
but
don't think they
could
would
one
be
not
immune to.
have the foresight to say, well, these people don't have any actual idea what they want to do. I mean, they don't have ideas for Wales
But it's
in
like if
particular.
you're in that orbit
So you
of
can see. I mean, I'm just saying, can you not look at someone and say, well, they're probably going to put me in the future in this bad situation? You know what I mean? Can you not evaluate prospectively? Or should you not be
Well, I mean,
expected to as a voter to some extent? I guess
I
what I'm
think I
saying.
think the first thing is like a lot of voters would agree with the statement. I don't think these people have any clue what it is they're trying to do as applied to Labour, the Conservatives, all the political
Mm,
parties. So again, it lowers the bar a bit for them in terms of, um, you know, these guys are clueless. A lot of the voters that are finding them attractive think all the other guys are clueless as well. And there is also an element to which it isn't true, in terms of there are things that reform voters care a lot about that they feel reform are very clear on what they would do. I mean, most notoriously immigration,
hmm
which is the core owned issue for every radical right party. And then the logic becomes, well, yeah, they'll be rubbish at running the other stuff, but everyone's rubbish at running the other stuff. But at least they'll deal with this one issue that we're really
yeah.
annoyed about, and that's something. Um,
Yeah.
Now, again, I don't think that logic carries through into government to the extent that some of these voters imagine it will do.
Yeah.
Um, I think voters are not as charitably inclined towards incompetence as they imagine themselves to be ahead of time. So, but perhaps I do assume a lower level of foresight from the average voter than you do, Matt. Maybe that's where we
No,
differ.
well,
But
maybe
you
I'm
could
wrong.
apply it.
Maybe it could be brilliant. I mean, maybe reform could help in terms of education, healthcare, the core issues that the Senedd is charged with, the things that matter to people, like literally every day in life or death terms. I just would appreciate it if my fellow citizens would think about that a little bit before the catastrophe.
But what would you say then in light of that with people who applied that same kind of logic to voting for Labour in the last Westminster election and are now livid with what they've received?
Or voting for Brexit could be cast in similar terms.
Yeah.
I'd say don't give up.
Yeah.
It is possible to improve our democratic system.
Okay. Well, I
like,
mean,
it's not just a random roll of a dice. We can do better. I think we can. Yeah.
So I think two final things for this episode. The first of which is a segment that I have ingeniously titled "The Guest's Best Guess." Okay. So in keeping with our general theme of political forecasting, because that's what this podcast is actually meant to be about, other than Matt getting really angry at Welsh people.
Sorry. No, I mean, no. It is literally the trope of the academic giving out that the voter doesn't know enough. I mean, I'm conscious of that. I would just say in this particular case with reform, the corruption scandal with Nathan Gill is something people really should know about.
Yeah.
Now, if they take it into account or decide to discard it, and that, oh well, I'm sure there's controversies with, Keir Starmer's glasses were funded by such and such.
Yeah.
But I think if your Welsh leader is admitted publicly to be funded by essentially like the Russian state as a kind of a psychological operation against European democracy, people voting in the by-election in Wales, where the candidate is a life, like
a chummy
political life buddy of this person, not knowing that is sort of unacceptable to me.
Right. Every voter is entitled to their own proclivities. All right. If they want to vote for corruption, they're allowed to. But segment, come on, shut the hell up, Matt.
Sorry, my apologies. It's been kind of a trying week. Yeah.
We have asked if Rob Ford would like to stake his professional reputation on trying to predict the outcome of the Caerphilly by-election. Are you willing to take the plunge?
I'm willing to hazard a prediction. I'm not staking my professional reputation.
I'm sorry, it's in the fine print.
We should have told you that before.
You've got the stakes there. I mean, I'll take the L if I get it wrong.
Fair.
So what do you think?
I will offer one and then own up to failure if it comes off wrong.
I'll do the same.
I think it's going to be Plaid first, Reform second, Labour third.
Nice.
I mean, and I base this on nothing more than going through the electoral history of the seat, where it is in Wales geographically, where it is in Wales sociologically and politically as a South Wales Valley seat. And also, it just feels to me, and this is more of a vibes-based observation, that there's a really obvious logic to Labour to Plaid switching. I mean, it works at like several levels. It works as a way of saying the Westminster Labour government's not left-wing enough. It works as a way of saying the Welsh Assembly Labour government has failed us. It works as a way of stopping reform. I mean, it's ironic, I think, that there are vans going around saying only Labour can win here. I mean, people can read the polls. I think, only Plaid can win here. It's probably there's another van somewhere doing that. So it seems to me like there's
thousands of vans going around.
Crashing into each other.
So it seems to me there's a number of logics to a big Labour to Plaid swing. And I think Reform will do well, but I just wonder about where their ceiling is in a seat like this, what their organisational capacity is in an area like this where they haven't necessarily competed so much in the past. So, I'm sure I'll get handed my big, cold sandwich of defeat when Reform win the seat by 10 points over Labour and Plaid come third. But that's the colours I'm nailing to my mast right there.
Okay, Matt, you have a similar prediction, or are you
Labour third? Absolutely. So I've been trying to learn over my life as an academic. So I've consistently gone against the markets to predict the more liberal candidate. So strictly just as an exercise in self-development.
Nice.
Reform are going to absolutely blast this seat. I do see it as a toss-up. But just looking at those betting markets and imputing to them things that I don't know, I'm going to say Reform are the favourites. And
brilliant.
if Plaid win, I'll have been wrong.
Yeah, where are my boys? The Monster Raving Loony Party. Now is your chance, right? I will stand for the Monster Raving Loony Party. I'm going to make an executive decision to move the Great Crack into the next episode,
fair enough.
and I will draw a line under this episode. Unless you have any final thoughts on the Caerphilly by-election, Rob.
Well, I mean, it's nice that one of us is going to look have egg on our faces one way or the other. So
It's called a hedging strategy.
Brilliant. Okay.
the academic consensus is there is no academic consensus.
Have you seen those? Just to say, have you seen the various polls of UK academics that have been done in the run up to major elections?
They're embarrassing.
Oh
for
my
all of us in the
goodness!
profession.
My goodness me. We have been pretty consistently wrong in a pretty consistent direction for a
This
pretty
is
long time.
basically the only situation in which I'm in favour of less polling. Please stop polling my colleagues. This is not good for our professional collective reputation.
Well, I have heard that predicting the success of right-wing movements in the UK can be very good for one's career. So I'm going to go with that flow.
Yeah, there is a potential advantage to nailing your colours to a certain mast financially. Anyway, moving on. Thank you everybody for watching today's episode of the Horse Race Politics podcast. That was our discussion of the Caerphilly by-election. We'll be back with our next episode next week to discuss, I mean, just generally what the fuck has been going on for the past 13, 14 months. Rob, thank you for joining us, and everybody will be back for part 2.